You may be seated. Some of you have had the opportunity to already meet Rabbi Abe Friedman, who is joining us this year, spending time with the congregation, serving the congregation, coming from Philadelphia area, from pulpit in Philadelphia, and grateful to have Rabbi Friedman with us this morning's sermon.
Shabbat Shalom, very happy to be here. Deep wisdom can be found sometimes in very surprising places. I trained to be a rabbi in Los Angeles, where I spent a lot of time listening to local radio interviews because I was driving a car too old to have a CD player, which Levi's friends, you can ask your parents and grandparents about that later. So I listened to the radio. And I'm listening one day, and the news was full of some celebrity who had been arrested in the midst of some kind of outrageous behavior that would seem to be very preventable, and yet. And so they had invited onto this particular show as a guest one of the, I don't know what we'll call it, like PR fixers, the people who get called in these situations to straighten out the trouble and try to put things right. And they were analyzing the ins and outs. It was honestly, most of it so meaningless that I don't even remember exactly the circumstances. Until the end, when they asked the most incredible question, they said to this guy, right, your whole business is fixing these huge messes that people make for themselves. You must have some idea about what it would take for a person to never need to hire you. And he said, yes, in fact. I said, if you never want to hire me, make sure that no matter how much fame, power, importance you attain in the world, that you keep someone in your life who can say to you, you know, it's probably not such a hot idea to snort 6 lines of cocaine and drive 80 miles an hour through a school zone. It seems so simple to the rest of us, but now, as Levi pointed out earlier, our Torah portion has certain limitations that are meant to keep a king from becoming too rich, too powerful. And in fact, it's a really striking thing if you look carefully at those verses. The Torah says nothing about the prerogatives or rights of a king. The only thing that the Torah is interested when it comes to earthly government and leadership is in articulating the limitations on a human leader's power. And so it says the king should not have too many horses. Why? Because God has taken the Jewish people out of Egypt, and if the king is really, really into horses, if you didn't know this, now you know, the best Bronze Age horses are bred in Egypt, and that's where he's going to want to get his horses from. And he's going to end up either sending people to live down there to get his horses, or enterprising business people are going to say, you know what, I'm going to become a horse broker, and they're going to move down to Egypt to be the horse guy for the Israelite king. Either way, it's going to drive people to go back to live in a place that we were supposed to come out of. And it says the king should not have too many wives or too much wealth, because that's going to lead the king away from loyalty to God's Torah, and he's going to be absorbed in his own desires and his own wishes and not be focused on what a king is really supposed to be doing. So the rabbis of the Talmud want to know, this is interesting, we got these 2 verses, they're laid out, this is the rule, this is what's behind the rule, the reasoning. Why don't we get that more often? Why is it so often that the Torah gives us a rule and says, don't mix wool and linen in the same garment, or don't yoke 2 different kinds of animals to the same plow? And I could go on from there. So many mitzvot Things we're supposed to eat on certain holidays. Things we're not supposed to eat under any circumstances. Things we're not supposed to eat, but only for 1 week out of the year. No explanations. And they point to these verses about the king, and they say, well, we have these 2 verses where it's really clearly, don't have horses because you're going to send people to Egypt. Don't get too rich because you're going to get pulled away from Torah. They say, look at King Solomon, who the Bible tells us was the most brilliant, smartest genius that ever walked the face of the earth. And he got led astray. Because he looked at this and he said, well, since I know that I'm not supposed to have too many horses because I'm not supposed to send people to Egypt, then if I don't send people to Egypt, I can have as many horses as I want. And the Bible, in fact, tells us that he had 40,000 stables. It's a lot of horses. And he says, right, if I'm not supposed to get too rich because that will lead me away from the Torah, well then if I stay true to the Torah, I could be as rich as I want to be. And they tell us that gold and silver were so commonplace in Solomon's Jerusalem that the streets were paved with silver cobblestones and the tools were made out of gold. But in the end, we see in Solomon's story that he ends up with offices open in Egypt and with his horses coming from there. And he ends up, toward the end of his life, led astray exactly as our Parsha predicts. And our Torah portion gives us guidance, not only for kings, but for all of us. How do we avoid this trap? Right? How do we avoid looking at a situation and saying, well, I understand the rule. Right? The rule is there for a certain reason. I can see how that reason doesn't really apply to me in this situation, and now I've started to rationalize. And so the Parsha begins, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lacha, that we should have judges and officers, judges to examine cases and determine what's right, what's wrong, officers who will enforce these rulings. And on some level, there's a fear of external consequences that keeps people in line doing the right thing. As Rabbi Schwartz mentioned, I moved from the city of Philadelphia, which, if you've seen any of the many seasons of Parking Wars, think to yourself, they made a reality show about people who give out parking tickets, and they only ever filmed it in Philadelphia. They never moved to another city. And people will complain viciously about the parking authority. Until one day I'm in a cab and we pass by somebody from the parking authority giving tickets, and the cab driver says, thank God for the parking authority. Otherwise, people would be parked in every lane all the way across the road and you couldn't go anywhere. So that's the most basic level, right? I'm not going to park in the middle of the street. Why? Because I could get a ticket, I could get towed. But we could take this instruction of shoftim v'shotrim, of judges and officers, on a more enlightened level. As the fixer in Los Angeles was suggesting, we could not just have one, we could surround ourselves with friends and associates who will check in and call out when we need to hear it. The kind of people who will say, listen, I know you think this is okay, but I'm not sure it's leading in a good direction. Or who even just might ask us, maybe you would wait until tomorrow to send that email. Just sleep on it. Someone knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then we can take this to really what I would say is the highest level, to cultivate within ourselves internal shoftim v'shotrim, to build up within us judges and officers who allow us to evaluate our own behavior and moderate our actions. Significantly, this Torah portion, Parashat Shoftim, is always read on the first Shabbat in the month of Elul, this month that precedes the high holidays and is the beginning, the warm-up of our process of tshuva, of our process of returning to the right path in our lives. And every year, as this month begins, we start here, thinking, how are my internal judges and officers? Right? Am I checking in? Am I looking at the way I'm living in the world? And if I am, do I have an impartial view of how I'm doing? Are there people around me that I could check in with who might be able to offer me perspective, help me see how I've been, help me think about where do I want to go with a new year that's right around the corner? I just want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, a Chodesh Tov, a good month of getting ready for Rosh Hashanah, and God willing, a Shana Tova, a good and sweet year to come.